person who we're going to be doing that to is Mr. Dave Richards. And we're going to hopefully hope he can give us a whole lot of information tonight. And again, I do thank you for being here and look forward to a lot of good information.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're going to do things different here. If you've seen any other, heard about it, we're going to ask you to start out. We're going to ask people to introduce themselves. We have a smaller crowd, just so everybody knows who's here, because I think it's a good way to do it. And we're this big room, and some of you are in the back here. It's hard to do, but if you wouldn't mind doing that, do the introductions. I think it helps make it a little bit more informal for us, and I think that's what we'd like to make sure we're doing. So I'm Dave Richards, as you said. I'm going to start down here. Just keep going up. How's that?
I'm Marion, and I'm with the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services.
And I'm Renee Rader. I'm with the Division of Medical Assistance, DMA, and I am in Clinical Policy and Contracts.
Stacey Barner, Division of Mental Health.
You don't have to stand. You can just yell.
I can yell. I'm the resource manager provider representation. I'm Elizabeth Ding with Arkansas County.
I'm Ann Hensley with Outreach.
I'm Don Wilson with Outreach.
And I've been told you, I'm Nancy Baker from County CPAC.
I'm Michelle Carson. I'm the mother. I'm Phil Smiles. I'm the mother.
I'm Jesse Smathers, Innovations Technical Director at Don Nancy.
Steve already put it in to research CRP.
Back to Skidmore now.
Judy Gregg, grandparent, Innovation.
Donnie Silver, Goodness Industries. Brenda Simmons, I'm an IDD employment specialist at Smoky Mountain.
I'm Julie Sinclair, Quality and Integrity Operations at Smoky Mountain.
And I am Mary Short. I am a parent. This is Katie. She is an IDD recipient, Innovations Waiver recipient.
Ah,
Since you guys walked in,
no.
Yeah.
Parents.
so first of all, start off by saying thank you all for being here and taking time out of your evening to spend time with us to help us think about the DD service system as we move forward. I want to say a couple of words of when we get started. We're going around the state doing similar meetings in just about every place we can, and we may do some extras as we go forward, but the goal of this was to, this is why we have the CPAC chair here. What do you call it? The CPAC chair is because we wanted to make sure that the CPACs were involved, which are those consumer and family advisory committees, part of the LME MCO system, but are your representatives to the LME MCO boards and to the system. Because what we want to do is to spend time with people who are who have sons and daughters in the system, people with disabilities themselves, providers, anybody else who is a stakeholder, which frankly could be anybody in North Carolina, because this is a system that is designed for everybody in North Carolina. Our goal is to hear what you have to say, incorporate that in our plans for future design of our system as we go forward. We'll talk a lot about innovations waiver here, and we'll try to use not as many acronyms as we've done in the past, but that is not the only purpose of this. Our intention is to talk broader about the entire system, and if there are ideas you have about it, we want to hear those because it's important. The ground rules that we really want to start with is that best bet for us is a conversation. I get to talk a little bit about our vision, what we're thinking about, and then we're going to just open it up to have a real conversation. It's not as easy in a big cavernous room like this, but I think it works. So we'll engage in a dialogue. Hopefully it's a very civil dialogue about what's happening in the system. We don't mind if you tell us what's wrong. In fact, we want to hear it. We don't mind if you tell us what's right either. That's a good thing. But we won't take offense at any of that you said. as we go forward. I did want to point out, one of the reasons why introductions I think are important is that, you know, I kind of signed on to this gig as part of the new administration as they came in, and going out and spending a lot of time across the state as part of what the expectation of the job was. The folks that you have here from our divisions in Raleigh coming on, they signed on for the work they do, but I want to tell you, they readily volunteered to come out to these events. And so they're giving up their time too. So I think it's important to recognize their contribution. And I'm so thrilled to have the representatives from the LME-MCO here because it shows the commitment that they have for listening to what people say. And in the two previous sessions we've had that same kind of representation. And I think the conversations we've had have been extraordinarily valuable to us as we go forward. So let me tell you a little bit about what our vision is as we're thinking about the system. What we've been hearing over the years and what we're trying to think about in terms of where we go in the future. What we believe at the state is that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities should have the opportunity to live highly successful lives in community settings with the support that is needed to live those lives. That's the fundamental belief that we have. There are a whole bunch of other jargon words we can throw out, things that are, professionalized, other ways to talk about it. That's the bottom line. That's what we want to do. We understand that the support that the state can lend through our LME-MCO system, for those of you who don't, I'll just do it one more time. The LME-MCO is local management entity, managed care organization system. Smoky is the one for this region. Through that system, we provide public resources to support that. And, that is part of the mission, part of the vision of what the state does. And as you know, there are limited resources to do that. This isn't about that limited resources, it's about how do we spend those in the right way to support people across the state. We are absolutely understand that people with intellectual and developmental disability need long-term support. It's not about a recovery model that we emphasize in our mental health and substance use services. It's about a long-term support model, understanding that people can and will interact better and differently with their communities if we provide that support early. And if we support people life-term, it doesn't mean that we don't believe people should work and have the opportunity to do other successful things, but it does indicate that we understand the difference between a recovery model in which people will recover and a model that provides a support system for people long-term. We will talk about a lot of things, but the reality is that our best tool to provide those supports in communities is the innovations waiver, the home and community-based waiver, which is what the federal terms are for that. That waiver itself is intended to waive the more restrictive environments of our institutional settings, like the J. Iverson Riddle Center, and frankly, community ICF group homes that we have in the state. So it is that waiver of those rules to make a community system work. We believe that it is the best opportunity we have to create those supports. Although there are other things that we have an opportunity to use. Things like, to get technical, B3 services, which are a way in our managed care system. If we save money, we can use those services to provide supports to other people that aren't on the innovations waiver. Things like the state appropriations that are provided through LME-MCOs, which are uneven, but there are state appropriations that go to services. They can provide other supports out there. And the county monies that, although aren't significant in many counties, do exist to allow for certain services. So there are other resources that are available, but we do spend a lot of time thinking about the innovations waiver because that's on our plate now also as we go forward. I want to tell everybody here that we have been having internal meetings with our department staff and our LME-MCO partners. And I say that up front because sometimes people want to think, well, you guys go off in a corner and you talk about stuff and then you tell us what you're going to do. We've been having those internal meetings because we felt it was really important for us to know what our system looks like, understand what the potential is, and how we can work together go forward before we came out and started listening to what folks had to say. But we have to do that because that's the only way we manage the system is go forward. We also have another group. We have a stakeholder group in which we invited associations, CFACs, and others to nominate a small group of individuals to work with us in Raleigh to sort of process much of what you guys say across the state, what we've been thinking about in the waiver as we begin to think about submitting a new innovations waiver to the federal government, which our intention is to do so to have a new waiver in place by December 31st, 2015. Really 2016, but that sounds better to say 2015, right? It sounds like a long way away. It's not, especially when you have to submit to our federal partners to gain their approval of the things that we want to do differently. So that stakeholder group is focused primarily on that innovations waiver. A lot of what you say here, all of what you say here, will go back to them to have a chance to process. Our goal in that is to make sure that we just don't come out and hear what people have to say and then we go off in a corner and figure things out without having representatives from everybody. They're open meetings. Our next one is next Friday, 1 to 4 at the Brown Building on the Dorothea Dix campus. It will be posted on our website. I don't think it has been yet, but it will be. And if you need to find it, you can touch any one of us and we'll make sure that you know how to get there if you want to come to Raleigh. We did limit the membership, though, because as you know, if you have 100 people in one of those meetings, then the chances of getting the right feedback on is impossible. But we tried to do our best to make sure we have representation from a very large cross-section of people, and I think we achieved that. But, again, feel free to attend or recommend other people to come. We don't tell people you can't speak if you're not on the committee. We try to limit that process, though, obviously, so we get through. So a little bit about what we believe, really in our vision. So that's our vision of what we think the system ought to be about, supporting people. There are things we know. We know we have too long a waiting list, that people can't access services when they need them all the time, and we have to address that. Part of this process is about that. We know that in our innovations waiver currently, it's very prescriptive. And when I say that, I mean that it has service definitions that are very prescriptive, things that tell you exactly how to do things, that it lacks the kind of flexibility we may want to see in a waiver that supports people in communities. We think it's person-centered, but we can do a lot better job at really focusing on the individual so that what comes out of that waiver are really individualized supports that meet your needs, but most importantly, your son or daughter's needs as you go forward. And we know that although we talk a lot about self-determination in the waiver, it's very difficult to achieve that using this waiver because of the barriers that, frankly, much of it comes from the federal government puts in place, but we can think we do a better job at making that happen. We also know that the way we provide the financial budgeting for it is antiquated. It doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of how we manage it. It is inconsistent in terms of the kinds of supports that people get that may be similarly circumstanced. And in our current state, if we don't manage that, probably is not sustainable long term. And that's one of the things that we have to pay attention to, is how to do sustainability. And when I say that, it's not so much that the current people on the waiver it would be sustainable for, but the problem is, how do you get more people on a waiver and create a sustainable future as we go forward? Several things that we know is that there is very little incentive for families and individuals to think about a budget that if you save money, why would you want to do that? Because it just goes back to the general fund. We think it's more important to think about if there was a way to be efficient on our side and to do this, that maybe we could save money and have more people get services. But we don't want to force that issue. We want people to think about that. We know that our regulatory environment, your provider, I suspect you shake your head, is ridiculous in many ways in terms of what we expect of people to do on these waiver services. In fact, I had one provider, actually I had many providers, say to me that it is easier to run an ICF group home in terms of the regulatory environment than it is to run innovations waiver services. And that just makes no sense. The regulatory environment around innovations ought to be much more flexible. It ought to allow people to really do what people are needed. We know that, we believe it, we know we have to change that. We think, and we want to talk about this, we think, I believe, that our best bet in creating a waiver that is sustainable, that makes sure that providers know what kind of revenue stream they have to provide services, that families understand what is the parameters that they have in terms of the support that they have for their son or daughter, and for individuals to have that kind of confidence, going to an individual budget process which describes how much money is available during the course of a year for the services that you will need up front, and that you work within that budget through a person-centered plan that's real, is the best way to create a sustainable future of this waiver and to create the kind of confidence that people need to know that the services are available going forward. And we believe that is the best way to do this waiver. Here's my personal belief. My personal belief is if we can do that, we can create individual budgets that are logical, that are based upon reasonably good assessments, reasonably good understanding of the circumstances that individuals have, then we can be way more flexible with what's included inside the waiver. Honestly, we should, at some point in time, be able to say that there's only one service definition, and that's the person-centered plan that you design for your individual. Now, I will tell you, we know CMS, federal partner, is not going to say yes to that anytime in the near future, but that would be the goal. That would be the goal that we'll have, that is really that individualized, so you can create the kind of supports that are necessary needed for people. We also know we use technology poorly at this point in time. There are a great many technology options that are available for individuals with disability, and if we change the way we think about the waiver and how we use it, we will see great things happen in terms of using that technology. And we have to be available for crisis. Because no matter how good we are at describing what people need, and we all come to an agreement that says, this is the individual button, throw a number out, don't take this as any number, but if it says it's $30,000, this is what the number is, everybody agrees to it, everybody's comfortable with that, that the next day, the circumstance could change to where that no longer works. And we have to have a system that you're confident in that allows for a change in that budget to address those issues. Because if you don't, you're not going to have confidence. I use that word confidence a lot because what we think is that there has been a lack of confidence in our system that one, that what we say we're going to do, we'll do. Number two, that what we say we'll do for a period of time rather than tomorrow change it. And three, that if there is an additional need, that the system will be there to support that. And so we know that we have to make changes in the way we do business to assure you that that's real. My philosophy, my belief is, I spent a long time outside of government. This is my first 16 years, or 16 months in government. With incredibly talented people that work at the state level, that work at the LME MCO systems. But the truth is, the best innovation, the things that are going to make the difference, are going to come from families, people with disabilities, and the providers that are providing those services. And we need to listen to that, and we open up the door, get out the way in many cases, so that is allowed to happen. And that's how we want to set the course as we go forward. So the last couple of words from me, and then we just want to talk about what this looks like, is this. As we begin this process, to think about how we sort of re-energize, rethink our innovations waiver and our additional DD services, what we really do want is what you believe. And don't feel any obligation to say it in our language, bureaucratic, governance language. Talk about what it is that's really important. And talk about the things that you think would make a difference in our system. For you, for people you know, for other folks that may eventually need the system. And we will listen. Renee's going to write stuff on paper somewhere, somehow. And as we write it down, we'll try to repeat and engage in that conversation, but you will see it again. Because all of the things that people talk about will be posted so people understand what people are telling us. we will not be able to do everything you want to do. Flat out, have to tell you. One, budgetary constraints may get in the way. Two, regulatory environment at CMS may not allow us to do it. Lawyers get involved at some point and tell us what you can and can't do. And then there is just the variety of other things that happen in our system. But what we will do is be honest about that. So if there are things you tell us that sound like great ideas and we want to try them, but we get told we can't, we'll tell you. And if there are things that you tell us are great ideas and we can, we'll try to put them in there and make sure it works. And if we can't do it today, we'll keep fighting to see if we can do it years down the road or next year. What we want to do is have an honest conversation. We think that we're all partners in this. So what we say to our LME, MCO partners, we say to our sister agencies within DHHS, this is a partnership between the Division of Medical Assistance, Division of Mental Health, Eating, and Substance Abuse. We say to other people, this is not any person's waiver. It's not DMA's waiver, it's not DMH's waiver, it's not, frankly, DHHS's waiver. It's not a provider waiver, it's not an LME waiver, it's the waiver for the citizens of North Carolina. And we're all stakeholders. We have an obligation to be efficient with taxpayer dollars to do it well. We have an obligation to do the right thing for people as we go forward. Secretary Bosch, my boss, has been real clear that what she wants is a plan and a vision for us going forward. She wants to be able to propose those things to the governor as we're moving forward, knowing, again, that everything we want is not going to be in there, but she's absolutely committed that will provide a system for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that works, that has long-term sustainability, and that meets these values we have. The same thing for people with mental illness and substance use issues, and understands that there is a distinction between what is needed to both, although we have a great obligation to try to integrate as much as possible those systems along with the medical systems. So I'm going to be quiet and let's just open it up for a conversation. Tell us what you think. What works, what doesn't work, what's your dream?
Are you going to have a meeting toward the west?
Yes, we are. We're going to Silva. That's not quite as far as we can go. Won't we go to Silva? Is that right? Hayward County, shoot. Not quite to Silva. Wayne.
Do you have that schedule?
It's October 15th.
October what?
It's October 15th at Hayward Community College in the Beal Auditorium.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tell people. We'd like to be a lot of folks there. And I'll say this to you, although we think we've done a pretty good job at geographically locating these and getting out, if it appears that we've missed someplace, we'll be happy to hear that from you and try to schedule stuff, although we have a timetable that we're trying to meet in terms of between September and October. Okay, so that's easy for one. I know many of you, you're not going to be this quiet.
I'll start. And I'll start at the beginning, and that's the assessment. And I feel like that our ability to get a true and accurate, comprehensive, and real assessment has been very difficult. Didn't mesh with what we thought was true and real for our child with autism. And then we felt like the consultative services were never there for what we really needed. We didn't need drugs, we didn't need psychiatry, we needed therapy, ABA, and there was nowhere to get that type of consultative program.
So help me, the assessment, assist assessment that started,
Yeah.
that did not address the
Because our child is very intelligent and he can actually read at college level, but he can't project that. And so if you don't really dig in and dig down, he seems like has no intellect. We went out of pocket and became a psychiatrist, and he said that he confirmed our beliefs, but we can't get the same thing over with our service.
So just so if I heard, is that essentially what you're saying is that the assessment process didn't necessarily meet your needs in special circumstances
Right,
because
everything
of the
starts
autism.
with the assessment, and if that's not true and accurate, then there's nothing to go forward. That really can make it done.
And then the ABA VA side of that, I think there's obviously a lot of conversation about that going on across the country and with our Medicaid federal partners. So we'll probably see more coming out about that.
Right, and we were the first family in Asheville to bring ABA in 2001, but we didn't have the finances to keep it going, and we had a growth from it, and we really needed that continued structured therapy. And we know Ivar Loboss at UCLA, we know the whole country of UK does ABA from the time they're diagnosed to free. You know, that I could even get, I work with a hospital system in Mission St. Joe's, and they wouldn't even pay for speech therapy out of our insurance. So it's just been a real struggle over the years. But I would say if we wanted something to go back with that was usable for this, you know, critical information would be assessment.
Very helpful.
The assessments, we really told to take 7-year-old psychobals, and they're not current. And what we're being told by the MCA that when there haven't been any changes, you don't need to do them now. Well, how do you know there's been changes if you don't do them now? And you get it now, and you look at the person, and they've gotten older, and their medical conditions have deteriorated some, and the needs that were here 7 years ago have really changed over that period of time, but you don't have the paperwork to substantiate that change. Okay, no, with this.
So the question of is how often do you need to do?
And there's an issue with that too, because what MCO is telling us, or like the ICF with home admission is, for an adult, we can use an assessment that's 5 years old, for a child that's 3 years old. But CF, Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 42 for that ICF admission says it has to be within 90 days of admission. So then we're having this issue of how to find somebody to do the assessment. Okay, when the assessment's done.
We have a theme here, assessment. Yeah. One of the questions, I think part of what there's a double-edged issue here. One of them is that you hear other people in other places say this. They're requiring me to do assessment every year. For some places, you don't say that. And right, and what people will, but it's not, I'm going to miss the nuance of this. The balance is how often do you really need to do it? And I get your point is that if you don't do an assessment, you really don't do any changes. The same token, what's the right interval?
Well, our services are doing what they're supposed to be doing, especially our rehabilitation services. There really should be some changes.
Right.
Or we're not meeting the goals.
Well, I know that we've written that down very clearly. If you imagine a very big board up here, the assessment just, no, don't. I was not suggesting that you do that. This room is a little bit difficult to do that, but if you imagine that board, it's all written in big block letters, assessment and several different words. Right?
Okay, when this was my daughter, and she had gotten some lodge when she was 4 years old. And so when the test was out there, they tested her, and she really didn't fall into anything, but we did know she had developmental problems. And so even autism, she was right there at it, but she wasn't there, and so they was, so they just say she has autistic traits. But the test that's out there, her IQ level was not even near what we're seeing. But the thing was that perhaps other testing that could be more promising with the money. I know there's brain mapping, and I had done research about it, but the Medicare does not pay for it, and it's very expensive. But that targets your problem, unless you can pinpoint the therapy where it needs to be, because there's a lot of kids just getting lost out there, and no help. And I've done research with the right help. These kids sometimes Even though there are lots of more promising.
I think again, we're going into big black letters, and the way I would almost describe it is that not only do we have to get it right now, we have to be thinking about the new technologies that exist, and how do we utilize this and going forward. So, thanks for coming. We started without you. Sorry. Basically, we just talked a lot about the DD system, and we're having a conversation about things that you want to talk about to help us as we think about how to shift our system and as we go on forward in the future. So jump in whenever you want.
One of the issues, and I'm going to make several points in this, the reason I asked if you were going to have me for less is that I'm from the Silver area, so I know an hour and a half of this meeting, which is hard. Most of my son's appointments for any specialty, anything, he's going to be in Asheville, so I have to drive that hour. Sometimes it's even just to Salem or Durham sometimes that I have to take for some of the appointments. For people that do have disabilities, and Jason kind of has the trifecta, he has the mental illness, he has the physical, the cognition, and his medical issues too. So he kind of, it happened to any one of those, where I call them issues. We don't, at that in the state, we don't have enough providers of any sort of medical, psychological, mental illness, therapy, physical therapy. And then Medicaid will only pay for one session. Sometimes, if you can get in there, if there you can get in there and work with them, get them stronger, get them with the situation, you prevent further issues down the road. So some of the requirements that we have to meet to provide the services to the clients are really just, well, you don't need this right now, but well, if you provide it anyways, 6 months down the road, is he going to be more productive? Is he going to need more medical care because, or less? So some of the requirements that we have now aren't thinking further down the road, they're just thinking immediate. And some of the things that we need to help prevent more expenses further down the road.
Can I just say one thing while you're doing that? It's a terrific point. And I don't want to, this is not a paid political commercial, but it is a recognition that one of the reasons why we're promoting the Medicaid reform process that talks about linking accountable care organizations with our LME-MCS system is that we create the right incentives. And when I say this, I want to be real clear. I don't believe anybody purposely does this, but honestly, the financial incentives, if we align the financial incentives right, which would essentially mean better preventative care when you need it, because we know that long-term saves money, we would have more money to go into more services for more people to go forward. And that's the whole intent of that integration. I think a lot of times when we talk about the integration, we forget why it's so important. Is that if we could begin to align those incentives, create a system that the medical community and our specialty services work closer together, and that we hold people accountable based on the same set of assumptions, we're going to do better off, and those things will get better. I don't know how we do it fast, and I don't know how we change the dynamic of having the right therapy and the right professionals in more rural communities quickly. We haven't gone east yet, but my suspicion is when we go to the eastern part of the state, we're going to get the exact same thing, is that there's a lack of those qualified professionals.
I think there's a major problem though in getting providers that can provide those services. We're just going to go through today if people are enrolled with Medicaid on together and taking prescriptions from the drugstore was written by that chemist. The drugstore isn't going to fill that script because that person that wrote it is not enrolled in NC tracks, or not enrolled with the whole enrollment process, much less the reduced rates that folks can get from Medicaid, because
access question is related to rates and other complications that our system puts in front of people. Welcome. We're having a conversation. Jump in wherever you want. Marion,
Hi, Dave.
you're way back.
Well, it was the only electrical outlet I could find. The battery only lasts about an hour. I'm Mary Short. The individualized budget idea, it occurred to me the other day, how is this any different than that idea about the tiered waivers? Are we going to be locked into budget categories as we were going to be locked into those tiered waivers that never materialized? Because that idea was originally a 4-tiered budget categories. And if you suddenly had changes so that you needed more service, you better have your little fingers crossed that there was room in that higher level tier for you, because the slots were assigned by tiers. So why aren't we just abandoning this idea of locking us into budget categories and doing a real assessment and doing aggregate funding? So you justify, based on your assessment and the plan of care and your available natural supports, which, Dave, do you agree natural supports are voluntary? But why are we trying to lock people into a budget?
I would disagree with your premise that we're trying to lock people. So let me go back. What Mary is describing is that there was a vision and a plan from the General Assembly, probably 10 years ago it started. I'll lose the years, with the idea of creating a series of tiered, separate home and community-based waivers. At the time it was called CAP. So there would have been 4 different CAP waivers that would have, I think, 25,000 was one level, 40,000. Get the point, goes up and sort of cascades up to the highest level. And the goal of that is that people would be slotted essentially into where those waiver slots were, so that would make some predictability going forward. The significant difference, the first significant difference in what we're talking about today is that this will be one waiver. In that effort, it would have required people going from one waiver to another, which is it's a more cumbersome process in the CMS world. And when I say CMS, I am continuing to refer to the federal agency that runs the Medicaid and Medicare agency that is the authority for these waivers. So that's one big difference, right, is that it is one waiver, so there won't be that sense that you can't go from one place to another. In our vision, and that's what we're hearing from people, is that there has to be, so if there is so if there's a budget category that you come up with, and we'll have several out there, and it's a $50,000 budget category, say, and that's the budget that you have, but circumstances change, that there is an out. And the out allows the people to go to a different level and all to do that. Mary brought another really important point, something that she described as aggregate funding, which the theory is, and so if I get too far in the weeds, shout and slap or something, because theory is that you will hear people say that each waiver slot is worth $135,000. We'll hear that. The truth is that there is no budget for $11,135,000 waiver slots. The state budget is based on the average cost of the waivers, and that's what the budget is available for. So it's somewhere around $55,000 is the average cost of waivers. One of the things that we believe makes sense is that, and we tried this at the state level for a couple of years, and I don't know what happened to it this before I was at the state, I think it was a bad mistake to stop, is that if the belief was that there was money saved, and if that money was saved, it could go into additional slots, then people would work to do that. And you would add slots to get more people. Now, if there's money saved at the state level, it would go into the general funding. What we want is, and I'll tell you, this is awkward and it doesn't make any sense to me still. One of the things we need to change. If Smokey has, let's just use a number, $100 million, that's too big. Smokey has $50 million for their innovations waiver slots, and they only spend $49 million. They don't have additional slots that they can add to take that other $1 million, which doesn't make a lot of sense, right? That's not certainly it's not a managed care principle, because on the other side of this waiver, the B side, that if they save money, they can spend more on services. So we have to change that. We know, I should have mentioned that front. We have to change that so there's an incentive that if people have a reduction in that budget, it goes to more services. Now, there's a danger, and this is what we hear from other people, is you don't want to create the incentive so strong that people drive budgets down so they just add more slots, right? So it's got to be a balance in that process. But that's that aggregate funding point, and we want to go to that. We want to make sure that the organization that's managing the resources, the local management entity, managed care organization, if they're able to save funds during that process, they can reinvest it in additional slots. How was that?
It sounds like you expect Katie to voluntarily not need services so that the money she saves can be given to somebody on the waiting list rather than meeting Katie's needs for medically necessary care. Although if Katie's not willing to accept those reduced services, here, let me introduce you to the state ICFMR.
Absolutely not. And I want to be clear that we were clear on this. This is not a budget exercise. The idea of going to individual budgets is about sustainability and creating a more flexible waiver for people to use in different ways in their homes and communities. A budget exercise would be we're going to reduce 10% the amount of money that's available in the waiver, and then we're going to go across and find some other way to reduce those costs. That's not what we're doing. That is not the intent, that's not the goal, that's not what we want to achieve. But we do want to achieve something that says if a more flexible waiver is available. So I'm going to make some assumptions. I was ran an organization that did advocacy and provided services, and what I can tell you is that if we had more flexibility, when I was running an agency, in a regulatory environment that we lived in, and how those waiver slots were allocated, we would have saved money and provide higher quality services to the individuals and families that we were providing services to. But there was absolutely no incentive to do that, zero. And no ability, if that money was saved, to help somebody else serve more. That is not common sense, and that's a really bad way to design a system. The goal is not to reduce anybody's services. The goal is to create an efficient system in which we can provide services long-term for people with intellectual disabilities.
Okay.
Now, 9 years is absurd. And I can't tell you what you're looking at. But what I can tell you is that one of our goals is to flip that so that no one ever does that again. And the goal of this waiver is to help sustain that. You might have read that there's a proposal that we put forth in the General Assembly that allows us to propose another waiver, a support waiver at a $20,000 level. I'm not suggesting that's what's needed, but that's out there. Part of that is designed to try to address the waiting list. You'll see some additional things that will come for us over the course of the next 6 months on how do we address the waiting list. But one of the first things, and let me take even a step further, I'm very cautious in how I say this. One of the things that, if you're a member of the General Assembly, what you want to know is that we're serving the citizens of your district the best way possible, in the most efficient way, and you want to have some cost predictability. In the current waiver, cost predictability, honestly, in the C waiver, is hard to predict because we don't have that individual budgeting process. Now, easy to predict now for the General Assembly because we give them, LME and MCOs, a certain amount of money. And that money is based on the capitation, that is based upon how many waiver slots currently exist. But honestly, unless we do something different, we'll never get off of that because we have to go and ask the General Assembly to allow us to add additional waiver slots. The questions they will ask is, how do I know what you're telling me the cost will be is what the cost will be? And that's what we're trying to set in motion. Something that they believe in, that's sustainable, where we can begin to make serious dents in the wait list. Should not be done.
So when it went from decentralized to centralized just 3 years ago, this whole cap to North Carolina, wasn't that considered a cost savings maneuver?
The entire LME-MCO waiver system was considered I think the way people like to describe it as bending the cost curve versus a cost saving, which in the Medicaid, and this is I'm going to get into the weeds, on the behavioral health side, which was a fee-for-service, enhanced benefit system, everybody entitled to the service if you met the criteria. Frankly, there was no way to predict what the cost would be. And that's not saying anybody did anything wrong. There was no way to predict it. General Assembly wanted cost predictability. In the cap waiver prior to that, there was some cost predictability because you had a slot-based system, which you didn't know what was the increase in those slots going to be in cost in a yearly basis. And that's where the General Assembly was concerned about the cost predictability on that side.
But you've still not addressed that issue. You still don't know what the cost is going to be in years to come. You still don't know how many slots you're going to need.
Well, part of, you're absolutely right. Part of our, and I think this is a great comment, part of it is that we have to do a better job of understanding what our cost is. One of the things we have to do going forward is be able to predict, based upon the needs of the people that show up in our system, what that cost will be in the future. We can tell you right now, there's absolutely no predictability between what a necessity, whether or not our assessments are good or not, be clear about it, necessity, and the level of service that an individual sees. Now, some of that is individual circumstance, so we get that. That's really how we should look. But zero predictability between what the assessed need of an individual is and what cost will be. Well, for us to plan and for us to do a good job at creating a sustainable, we have to have some idea of what that looks like. And this system will begin to get us to a point where we know that. And that's part of the reason we want to make sure we do.
Dave, I keep hearing things about costs, but what I'm not hearing is protections for the consumers, because I know personally, I spent thousands of dollars this past year to fight off an unwarranted attack by the LD and the MCO that violated civil rights, violated my personal life, violated me as a person. And what I'm not seeing is I'm not seeing any protections for those individuals, for that voice. What I am seeing is cost savings. And I wasn't reimbursed for what I had to spend. I wasn't reimbursed for services lost. But if I had used those services and if they had won their case, I would have paid them. So I think it'd be nice if the MCOs actually had some responsibilities and accountability to the families they serve. So we aren't seeing that.
So help me understand what kind of protections you would like to see.
Well, first off, in the denial that was actually given to me, I never did actually be able to prove that it was a company, whoever this doctor was that denied it. She never followed the innovations waiver because the reason that she denied it was because he couldn't read it right. That's why he has the innovation waiver, because of the mental retardation. There was nothing medical in the denial, but I had to spend almost a year in appeals and dealing with issues in regards to the case, and yet the MCO it was a glitch. It was a misunderstanding. They ended up saving money in the long run. We ended up losing services, and we ended up losing the precious time that could have helped us. And when I went through the appeal process, the grievance process, it was very clear as a parent that I saw the bullying, the strong-arming, the abuse of the actual service. And then when it all came out in the end, it was just a glitch, a misunderstanding. We're so sorry, okay? But there was a whole year's worth of stuff that we almost lost because of the fact, and we did lose 6 months, because of the fact of something that was done that had no basis in the Innovations Waiver Book, the TAP, or the Innovations Manual Guideline, that had no basis in federal law because ADA was being violated. Okay, he was denied the service because he couldn't read or write his own stuff, which is why he has innovation. So what protections are there for the consumer? Because what I'm seeing right now is an attack, and I understand Mary's concern, because I've seen attack on families, I've seen attack on individuals. I've not seen the protection for the people that are out there.
So I think, maybe to paraphrase and get it all down, is that what you would need in the system, the trusted system, would be that there's a balanced approach in which the protections exist for people as we're doing these individual budgeting processes. And that is a clear understanding of how to talk about that, how to get resolution. Understanding, and I'll be real clear, is that every concern expressed by an individual who is a recipient will never be 100% that we'll all agree. There will have to be a process at some point in time in which, as long as you follow procedures, that people may or may not get what they're asking for. But what you're looking for is a trust factor, is that there's a balance in that process, right?
I understand where Mary's coming from, because what I experienced, they weren't following state law or federal law.
No, I mean, there's no argument.
Go through the whole process of justifying why we did what we did.
So essentially, again, I think what I'm trying to say is that what you're looking for is something that balances the equation so that there isn't a unequitable process in terms of the ability for an individual family to raise the issues and address those issues.
Right.
It has to be a playing field that's even.
Right. There was not a reimbursement for services that were lost by my son. There was not a reimbursement for time spent and costs that we had to inquire. But however, the LME had won, or the MCO had won their case, we had to reimburse them. That was very clear in the very early part of the appeal process, which makes it, they saved money because basically we didn't have no service. Okay, and that's the problem that I see, is that the savings are coming off the backs of the consumers.
I don't know any of the individuals.
I know.
And will not get in there, but I will say this. That's when I started out, the meeting talked about wanting to be civil, not that you have anything on that, but I know a lot of people in these systems, and I think that sometimes systems themselves, because of what they are, create circumstances in which appear that people are bullying and doing other things. I'm not sure there's a whole bunch of people that work in the systems that really want to do that. I think sometimes we design systems that create the inequitable process. So I get what you're saying, and I think from a broad perspective, what you're asking is that we create a system that has a balance.
That has some type of protections, because right now what I feel as a parent and an advocate in talking to other parents is there's really no avenue of recourse or protection for the person receiving the services. And if they don't have a parent advocate who knows the rules and the process, they're just kind of left out there in the wind.
That leads us to the discussion of targeted case manager, having a case manager outside of the LMEMCO, because we are lost. There is no advocate. Care coordinators aren't case managers. They're not social workers doing whole person care. And when you have an ISP meeting and you ask for a community guide, and the first thing your care coordinator says to you, and we have an innovation slot, we ask for community guide, and the very first thing the LMEMCO responds to me is, oh, that's a 90-day service. Really? It doesn't say that in my copy of the innovations waiver. What page are you looking at? Dave, I'm telling you, we need targeted case managers. We need private. They cannot be paid by the LMEMCO.
So what, jump in, we've heard this in lots of places we go, we continue to hear it. And we had it at our first stakeholder meeting, that conversation. One of the things I'd like to encourage people to talk about is to do this, and it's not a jargon issue. One is that in the CMS world, we're not going to get something that says you're an advocate. So just know that they're not going to pay for something that says that. So that's a cautionary tale about how you talk about it. The other side of it is, so I think what we're hearing from people is that there is something missing in terms of that ability to have somebody that is not affiliated with the LME-MCO, nor the provider agency that's there to provide other kinds of support to people in this respect. And I think we're hearing that from a lot of places.
My concern is,
our case manager and our Q could not work for the same company.
and my issue there, the person assessing which is the SS assessment, which is housed by the MCO, and then the person managing the need or writing the script is housed by the MCO, okay? Then you have your contracts with your closed network of providers who really and truthfully are trying to figure out how to survive from day to day and how to deal with all the changes that are coming down. There's really, understand what Mary's talking about that advocacy piece. It's not so much an advocacy piece, it's the fact there's somebody there that understands the family and the plight they're in. What we're running into is, there's nobody really wanting to understand that. The provider Q doesn't want to understand that because if he speaks up, he might lose his contract or he might have an issue. The care coordinator is not going to speak up. The community guide, well, they're just addressing certain issues. So there's nobody there looking at the whole person.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I heard you speak some months ago on a related topic, and you indicated at that time there was going to be some effort to give the ACOs more stake in the outcomes, not just the finances. What's being done so that it matters to the ACO? What happens to the folks?
Part of our plan for Medicaid reform has been always based upon aligning the right incentives, and those incentives being outcomes for individuals versus the process that, frankly, everything's tied to right now. And with that, creating both financial incentives and penalties if you don't meet certain outcomes. We had our reform plan passed the House of Representatives in unanimous vote. It got stalled in the Senate. We're continuing to propose that plan with that vision, working on the things we can because we were required to not go further with that. There are things we can do currently with the LME-MCOs in terms of that effort. We're having regular conversations with the leadership of the MCOs about initially testing some of those things because you don't want to start immediately where the financial incentives or penalties are there, even if it work. But that's our goal, is to create a system that says, let's use employment maybe as an example of that. So whatever we think is the right number of people that should have access to employment, let's talk about what those incentives are. Let's talk about, the number of people that have high satisfaction with the role of the care coordinator in the LME-MCO and other things. So things like that, which we can begin to peg and measure, and probably a host of others I'm losing right now on this, that should be those incentives, but that create the right pathway. So that's our goal. That doesn't happen overnight. You've got to really.
In medical care, we're going to the ACOs, which is taking a totally different look. So I'm going to treat you today and I'm going to get you well, saying I'm going to treat you for the next 10 years and stay well, because then I'm going to get that as reimbursement. So I kind of see this as what you're speaking to. It's not just how is this person doing today and tomorrow, but 10 years from now, 5 years from now, long-term view. So is that in the North Carolina innovation? I haven't read all 300 pages.
No, it's come on, really? Marion has. So
For that stake in the game, somebody.
No, it's not there yet. I think, again, part of this process is to get this kind of feedback. One, what should we put in there? What are those things? It is, and you might imagine, terms of long-term care, it's a little bit more difficult than acute care. In terms of how do you create the right measures. You don't want to do things that create disincentives for doing the right thing, right? And that's the struggle we have. So if this was about the mental health service, it becomes pretty easy. So many outcome issues are there. So if you showed up if you have a mental health need, you show up in the emergency department and you have Medicaid, and you show up again in 2 months, shame on you, because we should have done something about it at the LMEMCO level. It's too simplistic, but it's pretty clear. More difficult, I think, on the IDD long-term supports world, because one, as we all know, some of those measures take a long time to get to, and so you have the long-term vision of it, and they're not quite as clear-cut, and we don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to create incentives that are the wrong things. But that is our goal. That's what we're trying to do.
You have to be careful with the incentives and penalties.
Yes.
Because the needs in western North Carolina, which west of Haywood County, much different than the needs in McDowell County or Buncombe. So the incentives that you have for Buncombe County wouldn't apply in Jackson County or Clay County.
You make a terrific point. I'll even make this a clear distinction that we have to all understand. So in Medicaid funding that the LMEMCOs get, they get a capitation rate based upon population and cover Medicaid eligible individuals in that county. So essentially the play is relatively, I don't want to say it's actually even, but relatively even between LMEMCO to other LMEMCO on the Medicaid side. Now, what we don't do so well is take into account the regional differences that may be important. So you may have significant differences in some urban areas and rural areas, and I don't think we are quite as sophisticated how to figure that in capitation. But relatively, on the state-funded services, the differences between what each LMEMCO gets and the next one gets, there is absolutely zero logic to it. No relevant relationship between population and the amount of dollars they get, because the state funds literally grew up over a long period of time in the system. And you remember that, well, I don't know if you do, but the old area program system that existed before this, 45 area programs, some of them that were very aggressive in creating new services, got more state money, so they continue to get more state money.
No.
And so the essential capitation for the per capita dollar amount that Smoky gets is significantly different than the per capita amount that Cardinal might get in their Mecklenburg region. So much more difficult to hold people accountable on the state funding side, because the standards are going to be different in terms of those levels. Until we can level that out, and that requires a long period of time to level, because you don't want to disrupt existing services by trying to move money around. Long-winded answer, but you're absolutely correct. Regional differences have to account for something. Yes, sir.
And I would stress that financial incentives aren't the only way to engage this. I would just love for the care coordinator to be as troubled as I am when you can't find a provider that everybody agrees is needed for a person. And so they have a stake in that, and that have an incentive to be as assertive in finding that service as the other parties are. So instead of saying that's awesome.
So parents could do like weekly reviews of their care coordinator, that would be a great idea. Or monthly or quarterly or yearly.
But some kind of feedback loop.
So the system has, it matters to the system that this service is or is not available. It is needed, but it matters to them. And so they, the pilots, are pursuing and not leaving that to the people who are basically pilots.
So I'm trying to rephrase that. Essentially, getting beyond just the, what we got to do is help our military go.
Working the system is a different thing than being invested in the outcome.
That professional investment that those staff members have in terms of the outcomes. It's a great point. Again, I believe that there are a whole host of people that work in the systems that have those real strong values, but the truth is that people go to work and they have a job, and that's what they do, and you never know what else is going on in their life. We can create other ways in which people are vested in the outcome beyond just the hope that they're going to do their job well.
You know, and you have the boss who asks the staff, who are you having problems with getting service?
That's
One of the things that I see is there's really no choice. I have to deal with the MCO. There's no other choice I can go to. If I'm unsatisfied with them, I can file a grievance and complain, but from what I've seen, that's just a mute point. They're going to do whatever they're going to do if they're not being directed or not being held to that accountability piece. You know, they don't have to do a good job. They don't have to do a good job. The dollar is the bottom line, and as long as they're saving that money or doing that, that's along the line of the business model. The people that go unserved, they may not have the ability to appeal or to even voice their concerns because of the fact that they don't have anybody there to help.
Well, I would say, again, I would not disagree with you that from a state oversight perspective, that our initial oversight priorities were to make sure the LVMCOs, as they transitioned to managed care organizations, stood up, had the ability to financially sustain this. If they didn't do that, then everything else didn't work. But there are significant accountability standards that we have for them in terms of the service side. I will tell you they are not at the level that we need them to be. And they're certainly not at the place where and I will tell you that the leadership of the MCOs feel that they're at the right place. And we are improving those, but we're not anywhere near where we need to be. But to be clear is that this is not just about whether or not they are meeting their financial obligations. Because if they, one, is that CMS requires, on the Medicaid side, that they're meeting the standards, at least the standards that they put forth in terms of level of service that's available to people. And our expectation is that we're going to improve every year, frankly every month, in terms of the quality of service that we're delivering to people. I'm hearing you say that there are other strategies we're going to use to get there. That's a
For example, if I was unhappy with my case manager, I just switched companies and removed the case manager from the picture. Didn't have to deal with that anymore. And now I don't have that option. I have to deal with these individuals. Otherwise, I don't take services. If I don't take services, then, that's a whole nother.
Maybe phrase this another way is what I'm hearing folks say is that because there is an exclusive franchise for the region,
Right.
that there has to be other things to mitigate what competition would have brought.
Right.
Is that fair?
We need a choice.
The choice is important.
We need to be able to choose who we want to represent
No.
us and our children and developing our care plans.
So let me ask you, kind of go back to the whole community guide issue that's kind of talked about, which is if there were a more robust, I'm not sure if that's the right one, but another group, person, entity, something that were available that could be a partner to the family individual in developing that care plan. I'm not saying it's perfect, but would that go a ways to what you're describing as that ability?
Yes. I have one case, my son's 24, I have one case manager, and I have him go to school, my son. Wherever he went, that's how much we knew that he was fighting for my child. He eventually left when he was a care coordinator. I no longer had access. I was set with something now, which I didn't want something now because I didn't like it. That's why I stayed away from it. When that case manager left Smoky Mountain, that's where we went. And we followed him to 2 other companies in that paper around there, security. And then we went to care coordinators. I was thrown right back in Smoky Mountain, which I didn't want. I didn't like the way they treated us when we were first there. So, I mean, it's just kind of like, I'm just going to, I'm going to have services pushed at me that don't fit what my child needs. And then I've actually had this, look, we don't use this service, we use the money. Well, I'm sorry, my child doesn't need that service. I'm not going to say yes to the service that I don't think he needs. Don't come and spend money just because it's there.
Some of us like
Mm. Mm.
Somebody that's a impartial person that's there. Because the MCO is vested in saving money. And you're saving money in terms of empty beds and not filling those beds. Somebody rolls off the immunization slot. They fill before that time period elapses. And those folks, the service is to be out there and be available to a person, and get the person into the service, it would be very difficult.
Yeah, and I don't want to, again, I think our belief, and I think and I do believe this is the accurate belief of what the boards and the CEOs of those organizations believe, is that their job isn't to save money. The job is to provide service. I will tell you that some of the things that have happened in the legislative process and other processes have created unintended consequences that force leadership to do things that maybe they would not have done otherwise. And I think we have to address those issues. It goes back to the right incentives. For instance, we have financial measures that essentially, for a small LMNCO, which if you do that more than Asian Western Highlands, you know something. For a small LMNCO, almost impossible to meet. And so we have to look at those, the way we create those incentives, to help those the leadership of those organizations not suppressed and understated side. It's much more about the service side. But I get what you're saying.
Well, I think, you might be surprised that some of the providers are actually providing services because they're going to use the service. I think people are 4 hours of the day treatment program, but they're there 6 hours. We've got empty beds, we've got people that really qualified, done with care, and if the state's intention is to do away with the ICS, then there really needs to be a plan to address that so it's done in some sort of way of not bankrupting the provider in order to close the ICS.
That is clearly not our intention.
But it may not be the intention.
Right, but if the unintended consequences, we're doing it. It doesn't matter where it's intentional.
And one predictable cost in within these services are those ICFs, because the state knows exactly how many beds there are, they know exactly what the per diem rate is. That is the state.
Writing it down in big block letters. Yes, ma'am.
Just to address what she just said about choice.
How could you hear what she just said? She talked so
No,
long ago. Oh, I'm sorry.
We have had a family member in these services for 25 years. So I'm probably the oldest person in the room. When we first started, there was one provider, and we had no choice. Parents pushed for choice. We got choice. It's come full circle. Now we have no choice.
And the choice of providers?
No, we have a choice of providers. We don't have a choice of a case manager. And get the feeling like she just said, a case manager was always in our corner. If we had a problem with a provider, we went to the case manager. If we had a problem with certain things, there was a division in what they each could do and not do. So, but the biggest thing was choice of providers. We didn't even have that in this present officer. And this was capped, MRDP. I mean, even the words have changed all in 25 years. I don't think it's paid different words. But, I mean, seriously, it's all
We have a section in the department. And I don't mean to make light. I think what we recognize is have this conversation as we press the
No, and you're not feel bad. And that we do. Now, that
Don't get close to the family. You go in, you do your job, and you leave. Well, somebody's in my home, I can't exactly treat them like they're strangers, or we do talk, we do get to know each other. And we did the same thing with case managers. But for Mr. Pellin, it makes it easier on them.
Part of what I can say, I used to be a case manager. And I love the families I work with because of the fact that I knew them, they knew me. We talked about my son, they talked about their sons, their daughter. There was that interaction, that personal engagement. As far as advocacy piece goes, it was more of a navigating. The parent is the one who did the advocacy.
Good
I
point.
told them to where they needed to go and what they needed to do. If they had a hearing in Raleigh, I went to hearing with them as a case manager. If they wanted to fire me, they had that right to fire me. And I had parents that fired me. And then they hired me back again. And that's just the way it went.
Why did they do that?
Because they didn't like what I was saying. Okay?
No, I didn't
like
like
what happened. But there was a relationship.
We all follow our case manager. They change it up.
I've been retired 3 years, and I still have families calling me. 3 years later, I don't work for nobody.
I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, this year when the representative that comes into my home for Smoky Mountain, she brought some paper around to reassess my daughter and again asked me questions and stuff, and I answered the questions as I can, but those questions on there was just straight questions, and it really don't, you can't really tell exactly what's going on with my daughter because the questions was just not detailed enough. And then she was coming to my home monthly, and I had to find out by North Carolina outreach that her hours had been subtracted. And this is the same child that I'm having behavior problems with, and well, I haven't seen any change, but her time was took from her, and you know, I just didn't think I was treated fairly. And when we had a case manager, it was different.
I loved her
I didn't get a
concept.
letter or nothing in the mail telling me her time was reduced.
I loved her concept in Raleigh when we had lunch that time. We talked about how the families, you were hoping that the care management could end up in the community. And I was really hoping that would happen because care management handled in the community by somebody who they have a relationship with is a different relationship than a person coming in and saying, this is what you can have, this is what you can't have. We're going to go back and look and see what you utilize and what you haven't utilized, and then we're going to reduce your services. Then you sit there and you have a discussion of, okay, how do I address that? I can't have my services filled because I can't get staff hired that I can trust or is qualified to work with my child. And that's a major issue. It's not, there's nothing on the incident report that says, you know, we couldn't fill the staff position. It says parents refuse services. I'm not going to just bring any old person in to work with my child. I want somebody that understands my family. Like she said, they're coming to my home. They're invading my space. And they are being told not to do a rapport with us.
But one of the things I'd say is that part of our belief system is that if we can create a waiver, and notwithstanding everything you said, I want to be clear, we're hearing all these things and hearing these block records. We create a waiver that has theory behind individual budgeting. Titus goes back to the early self-determination, which essentially says that families and people with disabilities know best about what their sons and daughters need. And so we can create a flexible enough waiver inside of that. I think we might be able to address some of the staffing questions that you raised and be able to get people in there. It's not something that happens overnight. But that's the reason why we want to hear it, because I think our theories about how to do this make a lot of sense, its implementation, and how to evolve into a system that does that. And again, I don't want to discount anything people are saying about the need for something that is there that helps you outside of the LME-MCO staffing patterns and the current provider.
I think it has to be protection there, because part of what I experienced was there was a clinical group that I still don't know who that clinical group was that was making the decision about my child. I don't know who they are, I don't know what their qualifications are, I don't know anything about them. I had a subpoena them, okay, but I know nothing about them. They never met me, I never got to see them. Even after we did it by phone, they did it by phone, so I never actually know who these people are. And what I've seen is that person-centeredness not be there anymore. That was there. There used to be person-centeredness in the planning system. Now there's a clinical directive that dictates what we get or don't get, and there's no person-centeredness. And that's the problem.
And then when you said if we don't use the service
You lose.
how many times since the last assessment, and we lose that service, or more than one service, then our child has a crisis. Well, what do you think caused the crisis? And then, you know, with my son, it's a mental illness crisis, it's a behavior crisis. And 9 times out of 10, when he has that behavior and that crisis, he winds up out on the coast at providing those behavior. And here I am having to drive 12 hours to go get him and bring him back because he had a crisis because the services were cut. And that's after spending a week, 3, 4, 5 days in the emergency room because they couldn't find a placement. And him in an emergency room by himself with a cop sitting outside the door to keep him in the room. And my child's not the only one. I mean, there's other people that have mental illness but not cognitive issues that are, so, I mean, it's not, the services are used or cut, then you have a crisis. Why do you think you have a crisis?
Again, I don't want to oversell the individual budget, but there is a design flaw in the way we do business today that causes that to happen. The individual budget process should address that issue. It doesn't address the lack of crisis in the system. We clearly know that. That's a big problem.
Dave, did you just say having a budget eliminates staffing issues?
No, I didn't say it eliminates. I said it might assist in that issue because you may be able to flex and adjust that and not worry about reductions in services if you don't use the entire amount. Or you may choose that rather than having 5 hours, I might do 4 so I can pay higher rates. And you may be able to do that kind of flexing inside of it. And again, the theory behind the original premise and original value base behind self-determination was that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that's, and I think what we're trying to get to is back to that, because forget all of the CMS rules about how you do self-determination and everything else. The fundamental value behind that is, I think, what we want to replicate, so that regardless of how much control people want to have and other things, they can actually exercise that kind of flexibility, which is pretty much.
Are you going to change the rule about relative as direct service employees? Are you going to go back to I think it's the third option, it might be the fourth option in the actual waiver application document that says, yes, we pay relatives as long as they meet the job requirements, rather than we pay relatives under these specific circumstances? And I totally use the word relatives because it's not just parents, it's brothers, sisters, grandparents. Is the state going to give up on that, or are you going to keep pushing to eliminate relatives as direct service employees?
I don't think there's any desire on behalf of the group here and us as a department to eliminate the ability for relatives to provide services. There is a desire, I want to be real clear, there's a desire to figure out how to do that in the most effective way in which we protect the rights of both those relatives who provide and the individuals who are having services provided to them. And we probably will have disagreements about hours and some other things going forward. Absolutely no desire on our part to eliminate the ability for relatives to provide services. But that's part of why this conversation is going on. That's part of what's going on.
Here tonight, I wear a few hats, so that I need to make sure that my home agree with what I'm saying is, as a parent of an IDD and listening here, for me, I guess, it's a little eye-opening. I have been this care for years. I don't have an issue. My son gets the best care, does the doctor, but I make sure that I can call that at any time. They're right, and I'm going to get a response, and I'm going to get support from them. So for me, coming as a parent from an IDD, from CAP service experience, I'm very happy with it. Problems I have with mom, and I'll do it with mom on that. Yeah, I'll do it with mom. And knows that. So anyway, and then as a CFAC person, I do want to make sure that a lot of the concerns I'm doing over that can be addressed at CFAC. The main thing I want to take those two hats off, and as a board member, I do want to make sure that at our board meeting, I will be addressing the issues with the board, that I feel like the board needs to make sure that somehow or another is addressing the issue that a lot of the parents, consumers, are not feeling safe, comfortable, heard. And I do know that there isn't anybody other than probably myself living here who is happy with their son's services or what they're getting. There are anything here needs to be doesn't have. I'm very fortunate for that. And I know that has nothing to do that I'm on CFAC, has nothing to do that I'm a board member. What I get, I fight for, and I make sure he has. So for me, I can walk out here, please, with, and I know where I can go if I have an issue, and just work out back here with me all the time. I can call him, and I can go to his office, and I can bitch at him, can I? And just direct me where I need to go, for that, unfortunately. But I do want, as a board member, to know that what I have heard tonight will be addressed at a board meeting in a couple of weeks. And the board will be hearing from me as to what I've heard here tonight, and what I can do, and what I will be able to accomplish. I can't promise anything, but just know as the three hats I'm wearing here today, parent here, I'm happy. CFAC, I'm not happy. Back to CFAC, so the board will be hearing what I have heard tonight. So for me, as an individual, three roles that I play, I will do my best to take back what I have heard tonight and try to figure out how, as a board, so we can do a better job without smoking the risks.
I really appreciate you saying that, and I think hope everybody else heard that. Is that and I want to, again, the reason why I want to make sure that you do that, we had smoking representation here, because, you know, if the theory is, the belief is that the doctors issues, then that's not the case. And this is the case for every LME MCO we have, is that staff members show up at these meetings, they hear it, they take it back, and they process it, and that's really an important part of this system. I will say a couple things, one, if you don't mind, just to address that. I suspect, I don't know how many waiver slots are in smoking gas.
1570.
Okay?
We have a total allocation of 1,647.
1,647. So of those 1,600 or so, my guess is that there's a large number of people that are pretty dang pleased about the services they get. And so I think you have to recognize that there are people that are doing that. It is not okay that we have people that aren't, and we have to address those issues, but there always will be in systems that way. That's going to happen. So I want to be real clear is that that we know that across the state the same thing happens. There are a whole bunch of people that tell us every day, They're very thankful. They think what they're getting and the service they're getting absolutely meet their needs, and there are wonderful things going on by providers and others to make this happen. But any system is not going to be perfect no matter what we do. Any system is not going to be perfect. And we're going to have disagreements about how to get there. What our commitment, the state's commitment, and our partners in the LDMCO's commitment is that we're going to listen, we're going to hear it, we're going to address the things we can address, and we're going to try to create something that moves us toward things that you are talking about that make a difference in your lives. So I do appreciate what you say, because I think it's important to say those things. And the fact that the leadership of Smoky is going to listen.
I'd like to say that there's an advocate out of Asheville, Jerry Rice, and he and I and another parent, Kathy, we attend the Smoky Mountain Board meetings every month, and Jerry videotapes them and posts them to his YouTube site. And we get up at public comment at the beginning of every board meeting at 4:30. There's a 5-minute per person public comment period. And we constantly bring items from the families we know to the board of directors about the issues we are having. And we are never, ever contacted by members of the board. The CFAC does not contact us. There is a new IDD stakeholder committee that has been formed and is due to have its first meeting. Jesse knows about that. And that will be another forum for those of us, it's the NC Innovations group is what it's called, NC Innovation Stakeholder, and they are about to have their first meeting, video conferences at all of the Smoky sites, so you can go to your local Smoky office to be able to participate. But it has been horrible to go to those board meetings and just be ignored.
And I've had parents call me.
Because one of the things I want to be, and I'm going to have, this is going to become a let's bash Smoky meeting, then that's not going to help anything else that's going to go on. The goal of this is to talk about how do we improve our system going forward. And I'm
not have LMEMCOs?
In his life, I would always say what we thought was the right answer for New York to do this. But I will say this is that the fact that Smoky now is holding IDD stakeholder meetings across the region might be an indication that they've heard what you were saying. And sometimes maybe what people respond to you is not exactly how you'd like to hear it, but that's not a requirement that they do those things.
Yes, it is.
They do that because it makes sense for them to get better feedback. So what
No.
I'm saying is that sometimes people respond
No,
the
it
right
is
way.
a requirement.
Sometimes when they respond the right way, it might be helpful to say, hey, still have large disagreements with you, but that's a pretty good idea that you do that. That's just a suggestion that maybe that helps in doing that. Not that it makes anything different if the services that you're receiving or not receiving don't exist, but I think it's important to recognize there are people in the system trying to figure out how to improve it, and people want to work together to do that.
Does Smoky Mountain Center report to the CFAC's civil rights violations, anything that families have?
I really am going to ask you, we can have that conversation
Nope.
after, but let's not have that as a,
This
is not what this was
I have parents call me that are crying because they've lost their services, lost their Medicaid, lost their CAP slot.
I think, and I'm just going to say this, Campbell, I think what you said earlier is that the desire to have a balanced system in which those things work, we've heard loud and clear.
Okay.
And that is part of clearly what we're going to include in our effort, but I don't think we're going to gain a lot from that conversation. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a problem with Smoky. I have a problem with the power of all of these buildings. They have the power. We don't anymore. And we did have a voice.
Yeah, I think people have been expressing that clearly.
Or we felt like we had somebody backing us up. And I think that's my uneasiness. Is where do you go? They can say, and I'm not smoking, I'm not a citizen.
And I just want to be clear that I think we continue to hear what you said. We've heard it in other places. And again, we struggle for the right words to say about it, but what people will say is they feel that the balance is not there. And the side of it is that when the authorization and the service provision and all of it trust in one place, regardless of whether it is accurate or not, there's a feeling of imbalance in this.
Well, they are even in charge of deciding if our programs can get approved. That was always an independent. So all these things compounded was just like, whoa, wait a minute. You know, not that they are not providing what they should and the way they should, and we're not grateful. But when it gets down to really needing something and it's not there, and they can tell you, it's like we're living in Russia or something. Seriously. You know, I don't know. It seems to uneasy around when you live in
When I was smoking, I mean, everything has to be bad. I've had good times. You are,
Write that down.
when there's a problem, you know, you have to speak out, and you don't speak out when you have good things. But, my thing is that, you know, now healthcare is wanting to, put these people with disabilities, you know, and keep them in the community, and instead of placing them in, group homes and stuff like that. Well, the thing is that you're not sustaining the family when the parent decides, I'm going to care for my child. Then a lot of times, I mean, depending on the disability, this parent gives up a career or not, you got to give up for your child. And a lot of times you're doing a lot of work. 24 hours, it's 24 hours care. And a lot of times, I think the parents should be allowed to do direct care work and they can get the job done a little bit. Because when you do hire people from out of the community, they got different morals, you don't know what you're doing with your child, and I've had that problem.
Is there a fail-safe in the budget that, right now I'm my son's guardian, so any budget talk that would have to come for me, but God forbid something happened. My son, he didn't read it, whatever, something. If you want to spend $5,000 on this camp block,
Yeah.
he wouldn't understand that, so there has to be a fail-safe in that to protect my son's services and make sure that whoever's, you know, because he'll sign anything, he can't even sign that, but he'll agree to anything, so there has to be a fail-safe in that.
If you're his guardian, your guardian is perfect, doesn't matter what he says or
Oh.
it's not, doesn't mean it. They can't get it from him.
Say I that guy over there.
Then you have to make provisions for that, not anybody else. Then you have to set that up in your will, who you request to have that done, and you've got to set that up as a co-guardian with yourself, somebody in court. That's your responsibility. That's something you have to do. That's not something Smokey can do. It's not something your care coordinator can do. That's something you have to do. So if you want to make sure you've got somebody else who's going to step into your place if something happens to you, then you make that happen and you go back to the courts and say, I want to bring somebody over to our guardian. Somebody that you choose, just as I did with my son. It's my responsibility to make sure my son's taken care of. And I brought his sister on as co-guardian. So if something happens to me, Lynn walks right into those shoes and she's his guardian. But I made provisions for that. That's something I decide what I'm going to happen to my son. It's in my will what happens to him. So you can bring that on to yourself. Go back to the court and say, I want to have this person done. I think it cost me $25 to have it done. And that's it. That's all you got to do.
I think, absolutely, that is a real important component, is that succession plan. But just in the very clarity of that. When I talk about wildly flexible, you ought to spend and make money exactly how you want. And CMS won't allow that for that same very reason. Is that so? If you have a $50,000 budget, somebody spends it all in the first month, then we're obviously not protecting health and safety, which is part of our responsibility to doing that too. So there will be, whatever we do, we're not going anywhere near where I said, because it take a long time to get there. More flexible and at that level, but whatever we do, there'll be those kind of safety valves that have to be in place, because we have a responsibility to have to safety.
Yeah, of course.
Could y'all do more education on estate planning, such as the special needs trust?
Well, that's a great point.
Because I spent a year and even went to Indianapolis to try to find out about special needs trust. But that's a great concept and idea for long term. If you're looking at financial support, sustainability, I understand what she's talking about. I understand the guardianship piece. I understand that very clearly. But how do you deal with the assets? If mom decides to leave the house to Johnny, then Johnny no longer has Medicaid because he has access. Okay?
Make sure she leaves the people.
And that's where you got to look at the estate planning. That's where you got to look at those type of things.
Well, I think your point about education, information, training, and options is something that we can do a better job at. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm not going to fall down again, but go ahead.
I want to get into MCO bashing. However, it would be really nice for providers who have to deal with moving MCO to have consistency across those MCOs.
That's not MCO bashing. That is something that, and I think it's a great point. Our point is that how do we get consistency across LME MCOs so that providers who deal with multiple LME MCOs aren't having to do a lot of different things for each one of those.
Or one will pay us for this and then another one will
We
pay
are.
us the exact same service.
We're trying to.
Provided.
There is an absolute goal that we have is that business functions for provider organizations have a consistency across LME MCOs. We want that clearly. We don't want to, and this is the balance I have. We don't want to be so prescriptive in that absolute standardization so that you lose the ability to do things that are regional based. So there is a balance here, but we recognize, I think, every MCO CEO is at the same point, is that we've got to create that sort of consistency across those business functions. And we're getting better at it, and we're pushing that envelope, and every now and then we find ourselves because we think of another great idea that we ought to throw out there and make the MCOs do something different. Part of the confession that we at the state have to make is that sometimes, more often than I want to admit, the things that providers have to deal with that feel like the MCO is making you, it's because we at the state level have called them up at the last second and said, have you done this? And require them to do a whole bunch of things that probably don't make a lot of difference in our world either, but somebody thought about it. Or that we say we're going to reduce regulations, and frankly we do something that increases the regulatory concern, and they have to implement it. And it's frankly our, and we've got to be way better at that. We've got to go to a much more outcome-based system in which, frankly, the process is less important than what the outcomes that come out from the MCOs, and that's what we're trying to achieve. But, we are a system that we love our rules and regulations, and it's hard to get rid of because we all have a vested interest in it. But our goal, our effort, my direction from my boss is break through those things because that's not a value that we have.
The issue about sentencing exception in the MCOs has so come to say that there are enrollment issues with the authorization, and it's a view that the state, that everybody needs to recognize that we have limited funding to provide services. We can't go out and hire 6 people to come in now to do this very complicated billing service to get these authorizations. We've got an MCO that wants their authorizations done this way. We've got an MCO that wants their authorizations done this way. And oh, by the way, you messed up this authorization, so we're not paying you for 2 clients for 20 days.
I will tell you, absolutely, we're on the same page. Again, I would say this, is that I don't think there's a CEO of any of these organizations that would not stand here, yeah, you say that, and agree 100%. Executing that is what we're trying to do right now, and we're getting better, we're not there. But we hear it. And you know what, again, I'm going to say this, Steve, that's not MCO bashing, that's system bashing. It's the right thing to do to bash this on this, because often we're the enemy in that, and we have an obligation to change. The rule is, if nobody says anything in 60 seconds.
Can you talk about some of the new stuff they're doing? Can you talk about some of the new things they're doing with funding? Because I understand there's new ways they're looking at funding now that actually could help, or there's been some money given to MCOs to try to do, is that state funds or is that innovation funds, or what's that exactly?
I'll tell you the reality in this year's budget, there were additional funds primarily around mental health crisis issues. And it is not a huge amount. It's about $8.5 million that we're putting out, most of it on what you might call an RFP. We're not calling it that because it creates a whole different level of scrutiny, but more of a decision-making process to get the money to the places we need to. A lot of it to address those issues of people sitting in emergency departments. How do we change that? How do we create a different environment for people to be at? We would anticipate, and I hope that in the coming years that we'll get additional funds on IDD. Frankly, my belief is that this waiver is our best shot at doing that, and that's what we want to do, is make sure it works so that we can get those additional resources to serve the waiting list. Our goal, and I think we share this with the LME-MCOs, is to create funding changes to where we, essentially what we've done is we've created a system by which we pay individual providers from the state level to a fee-for-service system. And we capitated the managed care capitation, a global amount of money we give to an MCO, but by and large, that still results in a almost fee-for-service system to the provider agency. We haven't really done a lot of payment reform to providers. If we do outcome-based funding for providers, we're going to have to change the methodology in which we pay. Again, you bring up ICF. There's a lot of things that are cumbersome about ICF, but one of the things that it does do is it creates a absolute budget for an organization to know what it is, and you're required to meet the needs of that based upon what that budget is. We don't pay you any more. I do want you to go there. That's the part. But that is again, I would say there's a lot wrong with the ICF system and how that works. It's very cumbersome and effort, but there is merit in that effort. Well, that's what we would like to get to, is to where rather than paying people on 15-minute increments and forcing people to write all sorts of ridiculous notes that maybe nobody ever reads, that we create a system where we're paying on outcomes, and that we create more sub-capitation work people use, but frankly a much more global approach to how we pay providers.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking this morning and some of the success. I heard you had a presentation this morning. Go over here too.
So just driving this way. It's perfect.
I've heard some discussion that maybe the self-determination where parents are the employer of record. I thought maybe I'll hear some of that information tonight.
Well, and I'm trying to avoid the technical terms. Maybe you want to jump in and talk about this, but there is in CMS speak, there are words that people use. The employer of record is one where essentially the individual family or individual has much more control. They actually get paid to do that and hire their staff members in that process. That's available today, right?
In certain areas.
In certain areas.
All of the MCOs, after they went live, they had 2 years to get that program together.
Okay.
So, because we didn't expect the MCOs to be able to do that initially because it's a very complicated program to administer.
Right.
And so what's available right now in all areas is the agency with choice model of self-direction.
which is where the agency does all of the technical aspects. But yes, the employer of record is coming, and that's going to be where the parents or the person themselves or representative can really get in there and direct the service, hire the staff.
And we've been, before we had services, that's what we did, so we're ready. So we would like to be able to get on that list.
To hire people that's supposed to hire people. If you're letting these people into your home, you're giving your child to this person for their care, and whether or not they have a criminal record or not, it's not the answer I want to hear. I mean, what I want to know is I want to be able to look that person in the eye and know that I can trust he or her to take care of my son in the best that they can. My son can understand what my son is all about. So that we go out, we spend our money still to hire these people, and we don't take just the run-of-the-mill paraprofessional. We advertise and solicit people who have college education, or at least some college, to work with it, working through. So it becomes them who turn it over to the service provider at this point, and then they take care of it, and then we've always had a collaborative experience with that. Once we got away from the profit ones, the liberty ones, the attorney's ones, etc.
Lower overhead is what we were looking for. So, because, so we're with a group that the administrative costs are probably less, and so we're able to pay a little bit higher. And then we go to a different agency for some of the other services which we may or may not use. But we feel like that if these people are going to come in and provide a valuable product, then we need to give them a wage that's going to match that level of connection work. Right.
Talk to your peer coordinator. So it sounds like that's available now, so you need employer of record.
It's very close. We're training pieces of it.
Right.
We're very close.
And the other thing to keep in mind, if you're a family member and you're thinking about doing the employer of record model for services, there are different degrees to which people can do that. The employer of record model, I think, for a parent or a family can be very cumbersome, and there's a lot of moving pieces. But if you're interested in doing part of that, like you said, advertising and interviewing, there are different degrees of self-direction that you can engage in. It's not all or nothing.
What's the status of AFL?
I'm sorry,
What is the status of AFL program?
what do you mean status?
They reduced it so much to pay and all these things that you don't have years many people who want to do it, you don't have as many. It's been, I don't know who makes the decisions for what is cut, but
But I think, actually, I will tell you, I don't think we know. I'm not sure that we understand the reduction issues.
I think the issue is the program available for personal providers.
Respite.
Because that's the real cut that's been noticed by AFLs.
For the rest.
Yes.
yes, sir, yeah, the rest of it cut, their basic pay is cut. And like I said, I don't know who makes those decisions, just like, I don't know who makes the decision to cut all the supplies. So, when they should wait, so, that's why I was wondering
But
what
I
the
think,
status of that.
just on the respite issue, we've heard a lot about that. We think we have Melissa, is that we're pretty clear that we have to address that issue on the AFL going forward, and that there's a logic to that. I'm not sure that we did reduce the rate for AFLs.
You created levels, which then some people's levels were level 5, and they were reduced.
So maybe the level
to
changed.
2. And that then cut their pay, they cut their rest, and so people don't want to do that.
So the status is, we've heard that, the respite issue, we've just heard something else. So it's on our list, and that we'll be talking more with people about it.
To me, it's an issue of, if you're trying to person-centered, you're trying to keep them in the communities. There are plenty of us out here who don't want to place our family member institution. Y'all don't want us to. We have no other family that can do as your daughter has done. What's your option? Saturday over there. And now that's the end.
Yeah, that's not, again, I don't think our intention was to do anything to damage that as a provider option. We think that is a good option.
It had to do, if I remember correctly, it had to do with foster. They lined it up with foster care because of the tax exemption that AFLs were, got and so forth. And then,
Well, they took that away too.
so yeah,
There's some things that we didn't take away, federal regulatory things that we had to do. So just want to be clear, in past jobs, there are a lot of things we did, but, yeah. Yes, ma'am. We got, the issue is we got to address how do we make sure that people want to continue. All right, so.
any way that you can bring back self-determination so that it actually becomes more than just a word.
Well, so you missed the incredible opening speech. I'm sorry.
Well, me and you go back to self-determination. So.
And going back to our values. It's a clear value. We believe in that. We think it's the right answer. We think families and people with disabilities know best about what their support needs are, and we need to value that. That is the self-determination value that we have. I believe, this is Dave right now, that individual budget is the only way to do that, and in exchange for individual budget, we have to recognize the flexibility that people should need to operate within that. And we have to remember in self-determination, there was that other word that we don't always talk about, responsibility. And so we have a responsibility to a broader community as we do this, and we all have to work together to make it happen. I'm exactly where Renee was, is that the far most difficult thing I think a family could ever do is choose the employer of record option in terms of self-direction, because you have to be doggone committed to that effort. Lots of people are, but we should meet people wherever they want to be and how they self-direct their services. At the very least, people should make decisions about who's in their home and who's taking care of their son and daughter, and you should have the tools available to adjust within a budget to pay more or less based upon what your needs are. And I think that's the ability, that's the promise, that's the option that an individual budget brings. It comes with consequences, because again, I'll use that example. Some places you reduce administrative costs, we can do that, or you might choose to reduce certain hours in order to pay higher, but people can make those choices that wind up being the right for your family and for the individual, and that's what we want to go. How was that in a 2-minute speech?
That's great.
How can we track the changes? How can we figure out what you guys are doing now?
What a great question. So,
How do we
despite
track
our belief
the
that
changes?
We're posting everything on the website. When I say we are, we're not. We had a glitch because one of our people that would do that, they had a baby. And so we have gotten it to other people. And so what you'll see on the website, and again, I'm not going to promise the exact date, but it will be this week. How's that? Okay, so we'll promise this week. That you'll see the themes that are coming out of these meetings posted. You'll see the themes that came out of our first stakeholder meeting that we had in Raleigh, and the information about the next one, which is next Friday, as we go forward. And we'll continue to do that as we go across the state. So the first thing you'll see is that you'll hear what we heard, and that's, I think, important. We do that feedback. From there, you'll hear what that stakeholder group is doing with that information and processing it. And as we go down those efforts, we'll continue to post. We have an email address that
will be posted.
the email address will be posted to where you read this stuff and you say, hey, that sounds like a great idea. What about this? We want to hear it. Or, hey, that sounds like a lousy idea. What about this? So we'll get that information. Another way to go through the process. I want to be real clear. At the end of the process, we have to submit a new waiver, waiver application to the feds that they will have to approve. And in that process, there is a required feedback loop that is different than this. And I should have said this up front. The goal here is to get out in front of that formal comment period, because formal comment periods, you all know, you respond, and we have to address the issues. But what would rather be out front and say, here's what we heard from people, this is how we're designing, and in a formal comment period, we're not surprised what people said, and we're getting the information in there. So we're trying to do it front load, sort of the conversation, with the goal of getting feedback as going forward. So we'll make sure that, check, I wouldn't check tomorrow. Check Friday on our website, DMH's website, or DMA's website. We'll probably find a way to get a link on the DHHS website to those two. And if you don't, if it's posted on Friday, send me an email saying, great, you got it done. If it's not, send Renee an email saying, what the heck happened? But that's the intention, is that I think the electronic ways of it. And you can always email us for information.
And that's the point I wanted to say. If we had the big board up here, I would be writing my email address and my phone number, but I don't have the big board today, so if you want to write down my phone, I'll give you my phone number first. It's 919-855-4197. And please feel free to call me because I get lonely sometimes in my office. And then email, sometimes better though, it's Renee.Rader. So Renee is RENEE dot Rader is RADER. There's no I in there. At DHHS.nc.gov. So if you have questions, or you feel like you're not getting the information you need, or if you leave here tonight and you think of something else you wanted to say, or you have some ideas or suggestions, please feel free to email me. We will continue to take that feedback as we go and incorporate that into everything that we're considering over the next several months.
Ideally, the implications for December 15th, but
No, I'll say ideally, that is our goal. December 15, meaning January 1st, 16, implementation process. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we should have the waiver draft ready
Spring,
early spring, because it takes a long time once we submit it to the federal government. So we need to, if we're looking at a December 31st start date, we really need to have that into the CMS by March 1st.
so on that date, Renee says March 1st, I'd say give us March, because what we know is that obviously things will happen there, but it will be in that March period. And that's, we will have to have a public comment period about the draft before we submit to CMS. So you will see the finished product as a public comment document to go forward. Now, the 300-page waiver theory, all right? So we probably will, let's say that we want to commit to you. I'm assuming you would say to us, why don't you also post things that say, what are you changing, rather than having to go through and look at the whole waiver, so it's a lot easier to understand what we're doing. So that's our goal. We'll make sure we have documents that are a little bit more user-friendly, so if you don't want to spend your life reading a 300-page document. Is that good? Well, we think we do a service to so many people at bad time reading. We had our Medicaid reform plan, which you could have done and read that. Slip at the end. The waiver, clearly we'll do that for you. And show up at a mental health commission meeting. You can put you to sleep in the market.
I have a question. The technical guide has disappeared from the DMA website. Is that because of the October 2013 Innovations Waiver version? And are you updating the technical guide so it agrees with the waiver? Because what your technical guide says specifically about relative as direct service employee is in direct conflict with what the actual waiver document says. But the actual technical guide, when you go to the Innovations page or the Innovations Plus page, that the guide is gone. I know that the LME MCOs still have a link to it, but the guide has disappeared from your website.
Okay, I wasn't aware that it disappeared. That's a question I'll have to take back and ask Deb Yoga.
It's on the smoking out list like that. I was on-
Well, but it doesn't agree with the current waiver, the 10/2013 waiver.
Okay, well, that's a comment, and we'll go back and figure out what
All right.
happened on there. If you weren't taping, but I'll say it anyway, I'll joke, is that you might figure out that maybe we weren't that clever to try to figure out a way to hide it, okay?
Oh, I never thought you hit it. I thought you were revising it and I was going to get a new one.
All right, so it's getting late, and I don't want to hold everybody up. Let me just add my last comments, and then we're here as long as you want to talk on the side of the end this way. One, first of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for being kind and saying everything that you wanted to say. We won't be able to do everything we want. We won't be able to do everything we want. So that's the other point. We'll do everything we can to make the waiver meet the things that you're describing, and frankly, long-term goal will make our service system reflective of the things that people are talking about across the state, because it's our system collectively. We're serious about wanting comments. We're serious about wanting them in a way that any format that you give us. I signed up for this. These guys came out because they want to hear it, and they're very serious people about getting it right. Smoking Mountain folks weren't required to be here. They came because they want to hear what you say, and we're serious about it. I can't say that over and over again. So continue the dialogue. Sometimes we will screw up, and we'll forget to put things when we said we would. We'll slip them off somewhere, hide them, or we'll, just do something that doesn't make sense. Tell us, because none of it's intentional. All right. Our goal is to make this transparent process to where we have an honest conversation about what we can do and try to achieve the best for all of us going forward. So keep that up. Renee gave you her email address. I can give you mine. It's dave.richard, the same other dots after that at dhhs.nc.gov. We have way too many dots in our email addresses. Don't put an S on mine, because if you do, some guy Broughton gets it, and then he has to send it on to me later. So leave the S off. And call anytime, because we do want to hear from people during that process. And I want to thank you all. We want to thank you for being here, and we'll continue to have that conversation. And if you look really far west and want to do it again, show up in Hayward County, right?
It's over, right?
And I do. That wasn't intentional, to see the least. That was not.